We always compare new electric cars to Teslas because in many ways it's the benchmark for EVs. And while a lot of those comparisons are unwarranted, I mean, you wouldn't compare a G-Wiz to a Tesla Model X. This thing right here, the Polestar 2, is the closest thing you'll find to a Tesla Model 3 rival. I have been dying to drive this car since seeing it at the Geneva Motor Show, and today I'm going to do just that. But before I get into the review and see whether this can take the fight to Elon, remember to hit the like button and subscribe for more awesome videos just like Now, when I first saw the Polestar 2 in pictures, I thought it was going to be gigantic, but now I've seen it in the metal, it's actually much more compact than I was expecting. In fact, it's actually shorter and narrower than a Mercedes C-Class. It does sit a little bit taller though, because the Polestar 2 is a cross between a saloon and a crossover. Now, Polestar and its parent company Volvo are actually owned by Geely, which is a Chinese car giant. And although the Polestar 2 is built in China, it is still very Swedish. There's something very pragmatic about its design, but it's stylish. It looks seriously cool, and personally, this is going to upset quite a few people. I think it looks way better than a Tesla Model 3. Now, as standard, the car comes with 19-inch wheels, but these are the optional 20-inch rims, which are properly sexy, and they come with the £5,000 performance pack. Now, this is a premium looking car and it's quite expensive, so it seems odd that it comes with this really cheap looking sticker, which is the kind of thing that you'll find on prototypes. Now, this sticker may look cheap, but it gives us and anybody walking past critical information about the Polestar 2. For instance, we can see that it has a 78 kilowatt hour battery, which is spread across 27 different modules and is good for a WLTP rated range of 292 miles, which isn't quite as good as a Tesla Model 3 long range, which has some 360 miles of range. It also has 300 kilowatts of power, which in old money is about 402 brake horsepower. Now, that comes courtesy of 2 electric motors, one on each axle, which, if you do the maths, means the Polestar 2 is all-wheel drive. So if you're standing still and put your foot to the floor, you'll go from 0 to 62 miles per hour in 4.7 seconds, which still isn't quite as quick as a Tesla Model 3 long range, which can complete the same distance in 4.2 seconds. Still though, you're not really going to notice the difference. Now, the Polestar 2 really isn't an ordinary car, especially if you go for that performance pack. With it installed, you get a set of Öhlins dampers, which is just ridiculous. That's the kind of thing that you'll find on racing cars. And if you're brave enough, you can whack this thing up on the jacks and manually adjust them if you want to soften or stiffen the ride up. And as part of the pack, you also get these gigantic Brembo brakes, which have been specially designed in partnership with Polestar. And to top it all off, you get these gold little dust caps to go along with it. What an insane car! Another thing that's very Swedish about the Polestar 2 is its headlights, because they're inspired by Norse mythology. See this big T here? That's Thor's hammer, apparently. Now, the Polestar 2 has a 405-litre boot, which is actually a little bit smaller than the Tesla Model 3. However, it's slightly more convenient than the Tesla because it's got a hatchback style boot, whereas the Model 3 is a saloon. So on the Polestar, you've got a much wider loading area. You also have a little separator in here to separate your luggage, plus there's an extra storage compartment underneath the boot floor, which you could either put your charging cables in, or if you don't want to do that, there's a storage compartment under the bonnet. However, there's a really chunky load cover, and unfortunately it doesn't fit under the boot floor, so you've just got to chuck it away. Now, most badges on cars are made out of chrome, but on the Polestar 2 it's the same colour as the bodywork, so it just blends in with the rest of the vehicle. How elegant. Another neat feature about the Polestar 2 is that its wing mirrors are frameless, which not only makes the car look seriously cool, but it actually improves aerodynamics, which gives you a little bit more battery life. Now, I'm pretty sure this is unique to the Polestar 2, but there's no ignition button. Your backside is essentially the key. So when you get in the vehicle and sit down, the Polestar knows that you're in the car, and so all you have to do is just whack it into drive. Now, there is a physical key, but it's a plastic monolith and looks seriously cheap. But let's talk about this cabin, because it is just a huge improvement over what you get in something like a Tesla. Now, there are actually two different approaches. A Tesla Model 3 is all about space and being open, whereas the Polestar 2 is a bit like a very, very classy Volvo and is more traditional in that sense. So you feel as though the cabin kind of wraps around you and there's quite a big divider between you and the passenger, and this just simply doesn't exist on a Model 3. But it does make you feel as though you're in a more premium car. And what's more, there's actually no leather in here apart from on the steering wheel, but it's vegan leather. And the rest of the interior is also vegan. So the seats are cloth and they actually feel really nice. And you also have kind of cloth bits around the center console and on the doors. Now there's this kind of wood effect kind of down here in the center console, but I think it's actually made of plastic and it's a little bit cheap. Now, what's really impressive though is the interior tech. Now, if you watch this channel, you'll know I'm not the biggest fan of these touchscreen systems, and I think that we've been trying some VWs lately and they really just haven't got it right. But this is by far the best infotainment system I think I've ever used, and that's because it's not been made by a car manufacturer, it's made by Google. So it feels incredibly intuitive to use. While most cars actually have their screens in landscape mode, which is what you get on a Tesla Model 3, this is in portrait, and that's a lot more intuitive to use because you find yourself not reaching for stuff. Everything is a lot more accessible and all the buttons make a lot of sense. It's clearly been done by a company that really knows a great user experience. Another thing that I find so amazing is that it's responsive. What's bizarre is that you get into all these modern cars and you use the touchscreen systems and they feel so janky and juddery, whereas this is so slick. It's like using an iPad or a Google tablet or whatever they call them. This is by far the best system I've used, and while it is still a little bit complicated to use on the move, it is much safer than the overly complicated systems that you get in pretty much anything else. Now, the touchscreen system is accompanied by this digital cockpit, and it is wonderful because it's powered by Google Maps. So if you're driving along and using the sat nav, you've got this wonderful view of Google Maps that takes up the whole cockpit, but you can still see your speed and other critical information like your battery range. But flicking through different menus is super easy because you've got nice intuitive buttons to use on the steering wheel, and like the main screen, it is so slick. I just haven't seen something like this on a modern car. I think the only thing that really comes close to it is the systems that you get on Tesla's lineup. This is a proper step above pretty much anything offered by today's German manufacturers. Now let's finish things off with storage. It's not too bad in here. So underneath the touchscreen, we've actually got a place to store your phone, which is actually a wireless charger. And if you want to physically plug it in, you have two USB-C ports, which are covered up by these little rubber caps. Now, underneath the armrest, we've got not one, but two cup holders. We've got one here and lift it up, and then there's a second one underneath. But we can actually take out this little plastic mold, and you can use the center bit as a little storage bin. Now, last but not least, we've got two little cubbies either side of the driver. One is in the door bin, and the other, there's just this small little pocket on my left-hand side, which I guess you could use to put your ultra cheap key in. The Polestar 2 may not be the biggest car in the world, but there's so much space back here. I'm 180 centimeters and I've got plenty of headroom, even though all cars come with a panoramic roof. And legroom is great too. The driver's seat is in my position and there's plenty of space. So if you're 6 foot and over, you should find the back seat of the Polestar 2 nice and spacious. Now, the only thing I will say is this beam comes down quite low, so you do have to duck to get both in the front and rear seats. But once you're inside, it's nice and comfortable. I also really like the vents back here. They're built so well. And underneath them, you've got 2 USB-C chargers, and you've also got heated rear seats. So before I get into what this Polestar 2 is like to drive, let's talk about pricing. So prices start at £49,900, which is really important because if it was £100 more, it wouldn't be eligible for the government's plug-in car grant. But because it does come underneath that £50,000 threshold, it means you get £3,000 off the list price. So if you were to go and buy one of these, the actual price you would pay for a bog standard version would be £46,900. What's more is the government grant is calculated on the base price of the car. So if you wanted to go for the performance pack, which is £5,000, you're not going to be shooting yourself in the foot. Now that does mean that the Tesla Model 3 long range is cheaper. However, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a better car. Let me explain why. The Tesla Model 3 long range is a cheaper car and on paper offers better numbers. It's a little bit faster and it has a longer range. So that kind of rules out the Polestar 2, right? Oh no. This is one of the best road cars I have ever driven. It is such an incredible piece of engineering. Let's kick things off by talking about refinement. So one of the things I often find of when I get into a Tesla is you feel like you're paying for the technology rather than the driving experience. You get in it and it feels like such an incredible piece of technology, a really great product, but some of the touch points just aren't quite up to scratch. And you do feel like the premium really comes with the performance and range, whereas in the Polestar 2, I feel like I'm behind the wheel of a £50,000 car. This steering wheel is really lovely to hold and it just feels like such a quality product. But it's not just touch points like the steering wheel that make this feel like a really premium car. It's also things like this beautiful touchscreen in the center console and also the virtual cockpit. It's just a wonderful experience that makes you feel like you're in something that has been designed from the ground up to just be this wonderful package. But it's also things like sound effects that make this car feel premium. Just listen to the indicator. Sounds like someone popping bubble wrap. I'm not sure if it was picked up on my microphone, but it's such a cool sound. But on to the important thing, what's this like to drive as a car? And that's the important thing, is it feels like a car. The steering is really lovely and weighty, and that's actually something that you can adjust on the infotainment screen. But on the road, yes, it's an electric rack, but I have got so much feedback for what the road surfaces are doing, and it comes through really nicely on the wheel. Now that's also helped by, on this performance model, we have the Öhlins dampers, which, as I mentioned earlier, is just ridiculous on a production car. But what it does do is it makes the car feel really tight and really responsive to your inputs. There is a slight downside to it though, and because it's a performance suspension setup, it is quite stiff and it can feel a little bit jarring on bumpy roads. This is a relatively smooth road and I'm getting a few shudders coming through the chassis. Now, because it's such a heavy car, some of that is actually damped out quite nicely. But there's no hiding the fact that this is a sporty setup. Speaking of sporty, this thing is very, very fast. Now, it isn't quite as quick as what you're getting a Tesla. They really do feel like they're going to rip your face off. But this is ample is a bit of an understatement. This really does feel like a very, very fast car. 402 brake horsepower. And it just feels like it will deal with absolutely anything, particularly as it's going to all four wheels and it just launches you out of every corner. Now, this is much more of a personal preference, and if you're a Tesla fan, you are absolutely going to disagree with this. but I find Polestar as a brand much more appealing than Tesla. I find the car incredibly stylish. I find the brand just really slick, and there's something very Apple-esque about them, which is ironic given that a lot of the tech in here is by Google. It's streamlined, it's simple, it's minimalist, but ever so cool. And I just find myself really wanting one. I think this is such a desirable piece of kit as an everyday driver. I absolutely want one of these over a Tesla Model 3. And I think that's where it really comes down to with this comparison. What do you want from a car? If you want the numbers and you want the technology, then on paper, the Tesla has you covered. And you'll certainly get more range out of a Tesla Model 3 long range. And you are buying into that, let's call it group, the Teslarati. Whereas with Polestar, it's a bit more understated. I feel as though you're not buying this car as a statement, you're buying it to fulfill a certain lifestyle. And it's not all about the technology. This very much feels like an electric car for car lovers, whereas a Tesla Model 3 feels like a car for tech lovers. So I can't definitively say which one is better than the other unless we had both cars in and we're doing a direct comparison. There's just a lot in it, and there's a lot of caveats of what would make you go for one car over the other. But for me personally, if it was my money, this Polestar 2 is absolutely the car that I would go for. But this car really does feel like it's moved the game on. There are so many little refinements in lots of areas that make it just a slightly more comprehensive package. So I'd say if you've got your eye on a Tesla Model 3, go and give this a test drive first, because I think you'll have your mind blown. It really is an excellent, excellent car.